Runaway brides. What was the final straw that made you leave last second? Story 1. Had a friend that didn't know she was the bride until she was halfway down the aisle. Her parents had arranged a marriage for her, common in her culture, and had told her that the family had all been invited to a cousin's wedding. My friend was told everyone was going to be wearing white for whatever reason, I don't remember. They arrived at the church just before the bride was scheduled to walk down the aisle. My friend, thinking they were late, wanted to slip in and stay in the back. Her father, however, takes her arm and they start walking up the aisle. It isn't until they're halfway up that she stops and realizes everyone is looking at her and smiling and crying tears of joy. She turned to one of her aunts in the pew next to her and asked them who was getting married. The whole church went silent, and then the aunt looked at my friend's father and said, "You can't be serious. You planned a wedding for your daughter and just expected her to go along with it? Have the two of them even met? Did you seriously think this would work?" The whole room was chattering about them, and the father just cleared his throat and told his daughter to keep walking. Luckily, the aunt grabbed my friend first and pulled her into the pew, pushed her past the row of people, and they both ran out of the church. Her parents disowned her after that, and she moved in with her aunt. Edit. They are an Indian family in the US, her parents are very traditional, and she expressed that she didn't want to get married and wanted to focus on her career. Story 2. Not me, but my mother. My mom called off a wedding just weeks before the ceremony date because she found out her fiancé had lied to her about his whereabouts and was partying at a hotel with friends and other women. She caught him in a hot tub at 1 a.m. with twin sisters. Now, fast forward about 3 years later, she starts dating and later marries the man who is my biological father. She said meeting the family was especially awkward when she discovered my father had 3 sisters, 2 of which were the twins she caught with her ex-fiancé within the hot tub. Edit. Some things to clarify. My mom and dad stayed together and later got married after my mom had learned who his sisters were. So she did get over the fact that they were essentially what ruined her first wedding. My mom and dad are divorced now and have been for years, which is unrelated to my dad's sister or his family in general. They just weren't compatible together and argued a lot. Not a big surprise that my dad wasn't the most faithful man either. I get my faithfulness in relationships from my mom, thank God. Story 3. My boyfriend at the time had a female friend who, the night before her wedding, finally spilled to several friends, including him, that her fiancé had been emotionally and physically abusing her, and she wasn't sure she should get married. We'd all noticed her being distanced from us, but she'd deny every time that something was wrong. The next day, her family mobilized to get the word out to all her guests, and a bunch of her friends essentially forced themselves into the guy's house to get all her things back. My boyfriend was a cop, so he had duty to press charges or something on the guy. I was never clear on this part. The woman was pissed off at him for a while, but now a few years later is seeing someone great, whom I've actually known forever and is quite a bit happier now. Plus, she knows her friends and family have her back and can get shit done. Story 4. I was almost the runaway bride, and I regret not making that decision. Dated my high school sweetheart for almost 2 years before the jealousy became overwhelming. I broke up with him a month after we'd graduated, but we were going to the same college and met up again that fall. I found myself pregnant by that October and was kicked out of my Catholic home. His parents let me stay with them, but we could no longer live in sin and had to be married. I didn't want to go back to living in my car, so I agreed. Parents wiggle back into my life before the wedding. Fast forward to the day of the ceremony and the music begins playing. I stand to start walking down the aisle and my dad takes my hand and says, "You know, you don't have to do this. You could come home with us." Could he have mentioned this an hour, a day, a week before? I have always hated drama and didn't want to be that person, so just said that I couldn't, and I got married. My ex was controlling and manipulative, and how abusive he was had become much less subtle. I became pregnant and turned over when we moved out of his parents' house a year later. I ran when he nearly hit our baby's skull with his shoe, which he threw because he'd found something in the carpet I didn't vacuum properly. Yeah, I totally should have picked the runaway bride option. Edit. Married my best friend from high school 10 years ago, and the ex passed away from leukemia. Freedom is sweet. I think it's important for everyone to remember that it's never too late to make a change, even if it seems daunting. It's great that you eventually found happiness with your best friend from high school, and I hope your story can serve as a reminder for others to trust their instincts and prioritize their own well-being. Story 5. Not me, and I'm not sure if it counts as a runaway, but my sister broke up with her fiancé 4 months before their wedding, which was already planned and paid for. I'll be honest, I don't know the full story. Even now, 18 months later, she still hasn't fully opened up to us about it. But I never really liked the guy. He was nice enough, but he absolutely could not handle his drink. He could never have a little drink. No, he had to drink the whole bar every time, then would come home and puke up over the entire house. He then dared to complain whenever my sister would go out with her friends, just for a couple of drinks, to the point where he eventually just stopped letting her go out altogether. His family was an absolute mess as well. His mom and stepdad were pretty cool, but they moved to Canada to pursue their dreams, leaving my sister and her fiancé in the hands of aunts and uncles who did not approve of her at all. His little brother was on-off with his teenage girlfriend he eventually knocked up, and he was always trying to one-up my sister too. Eventually, as far as she's told us, she just felt trapped by the guy. She was prohibited from hanging out with her friends and was forced to go to family events with people who despised her. He made her distance herself from her, which I think was painful for her, as she essentially missed quality time with her new nephews at the time. He basically controlled every aspect of her life. Anyway, she unceremoniously dumped him on New Year's Eve and canceled the wedding then and there, and I don't think she even saw him again after that. She was always out when he came to collect his stuff. Obviously, his family wasn't too happy about it and harassed her for months. She became depressed and needed medication, but it was my family that had to foot the wedding bill anyway. They were just glad to have their daughter back. Story 6. Not me or a bride, but my uncle didn't show up to his wedding. It was a loveless marriage set up in a small farm town. He ran away with the woman he loves and has been with her ever since. Story 7. My wife called off the wedding with her ex all of 2 weeks before the big day. Had a lot to do with him cheating on her, though. Story 8. Met an alleged army guy, pre-full swing internet, so no way to really check, and we hit it off. I was young and fell in love with guys really fast, so when he proposed, I was ecstatic. Not gonna lie, the red flags were there. He asked my parents for permission and proposed to me loudly at a pizza shop, which socially would have been too awkward to say no anyway. He didn't have his own place, and I never met his family or saw any evidence of being in the military. Cue, a few weeks later, we had a fight because he called out his sister's name during sex. He then told me that everything would be fine because he was going to take me to Kentucky to live on an army base. He also told me he wanted me to be barefoot and pregnant most of the time. Ha ha ha. We were going to get married and leave the day after I graduated high school. I did some real soul searching since. I became withdrawn and quiet a little bit. I was visiting my Nana one day, and she asked me, "Are you in love with him or in love with the idea of a wedding?" And just like that, the bubble burst. I cried and broke it off with him. 2 weeks before I graduated. Apparently, he'd already booked the Justice of the Peace, but he got married anyway 3 weeks later with the same ring he gave me. Poor girl. I wish I knew her so I could warn her. Your experience shows how crucial it is to be vigilant in relationships, especially when we are young and more susceptible to making decisions based on emotions. It's amazing how your Nana's simple question provided you with the clarity you needed to reevaluate your situation. Your courage to end the engagement despite the emotional investment demonstrates great strength of character. Story 9. A woman I briefly dated was a runaway bride. Her ex never hit her, but constantly belittled her and was basically emotionally abusive, telling her she was lucky he wanted her, that she could never find anyone better, that she was ugly but he dealt with it, etc. She was a smart kid, was a medic in the military saving dozens of lives in Pakistan. But emotionally manipulative people can get anyone if given enough time, and he got her. On her wedding day, her dad, who wasn't usually in the picture, having divorced when she was a teen, was having a conversation with her in the ready room and got concerned when she started repeating a lot of the things her fiancé was saying to her. She said that she was mid-sentence when he stood up and said, Let's go to Dairy Queen, out of the blue. When she was little, they often went to DQ and talked over ice creams. She took a second, agreed, and they left to go to DQ. But he drove 3 towns over, and they sat and talked over ice cream for hours while her phone rang and the battery drained in the car. She said she felt like a huge weight was lifted and felt bad that her friends and family were waiting for her, but they would all understand later. He eventually went back to the church and told the bridal party it wasn't happening and got his buddies to come and move all her stuff out the next day. She said that while her dad wasn't the best father in her teens, he was the best dad anyone can ask for that day. We dated for a couple of weeks before we figured out we weren't a good match. We parted amicably, but I haven't talked to her since. Reply 1. Thank goodness Dad came back into her life and did the right thing. I feel like a lot of parents who are absent in part of their kids' lives feel like they don't have any right to comment and stay mute in the background, which can end up just hurting the kids even more if they stay mute about important things like this, where they know something is wrong. Story 10. My dad was a runaway groom and broke it off 3 days before the wedding. The mid-1970s, so he was in his early 20s, his fiancée, not my mom obviously, and her mother pressured him into proposing, which he did with my grandmother's ring. He also felt society sort of demanded it, and it was more common to marry at that age than it is today. Deep down, he knew she simply wasn't the one, but figured maybe all men felt that way before a wedding, so he ignored that and hoped his feelings would change. Months passed, and the wedding was all planned out. When relatives and friends from out of town began flying in for the wedding and gifts were arriving, reality hit him hard, and he, to quote Gob Bluth, realized he made a huge mistake. He sat my grandma and grandpa down and said, "Guys, I don't want to do this." They were proud of him for being honest and actually sort of thrilled. It turns out they hated her guts, but they told him he needed to immediately tell her face to face. And so my dad did. Like a scarred war veteran, he refused to tell me details, but said it was the most gut-wrenching conversation/argument/hell he had ever experienced. But he ended it. Of course, this was the 1970s. You can't just mass announce the wedding is canceled via a text or Facebook message, which a friend of mine did. My dad took the responsibility of calling every single invited guest to tell them the wedding was off. Even more, he personally returned gifts to the people who sent them. His fiancée sold my grandmother's ring. Story 11. I was engaged, so almost like a bride, and there were several final straws, and a few were before the engagement. Namely, he lived in his car, no judgment on that, but this is relevant, at the time, so he was not financially stable, and this was just a couple of weeks into dating. Another was him wanting me to send selfies of myself, proving where I was at all times and what I was wearing, which was 99.9% my work clothes, black long-sleeve shirts and pants because I'm a server, and at work. So if I wasn't texting back fast enough, apparently I was with another man. About a month into the relationship, he demanded a key to my condo so he could see me whenever he wanted. The final straw was when he proposed, down on one knee, and said, "I knew we were meant to be the moment we matched," on Tinder, go figure. "I love you so much. Now I can show everyone I own you. Will you marry me?" Bye-bye. That was 3 months into the relationship. I had never met his family, but heard a lot about them. He had only ever met my mother, but that wasn't planned. I said no immediately and walked away. He tried getting into my condo countless times and calling me. Unfortunately, I had to change my number and get a restraining order against him. He was, and probably still is, crazy. Story 12. We had been together for 6 months when he proposed. We were both young at the time and weren't even living together. My gut told me right away that it was too soon, but I said yes anyway and went along with it because I thought he loved me and I loved him. I really thought that we could build a nice life together, so I made it clear that I wanted to wait a while before we actually got married, but he was keen to speed things along as fast as possible. I didn't even want to tell our families about it yet, because I knew they would give us grief over getting engaged so young and after only a few months of being together. As things moved along, I made it clear that I wasn't ready to get married at my age and wanted to spend more time with him before we went through with it. He sort of threw a fit and accused me of cheating on him because there was no other reason in his mind I could possibly want to wait to marry. Things started to get really toxic, and I eventually left him for good. I gave him the ring back and parted civilly, but he wasn't about to let it go so easily. He was calling and texting me constantly for weeks, accused me of being obsessed with him and following him around, and I started to realize that he was not in a normal state of mind. I was scared, but it calmed down after a while, and things started to get back to normal. Unfortunately, he started spreading all kinds of nasty rumors about me, of how I accused him of and was abusive towards him. His entire family turned sour towards me because of it, and it was difficult because we shared most of our friends. He ruined my reputation and my self-esteem, but it made me realize that I really dodged one hell of a bullet by refusing to marry him. Every so often, he messages me on social media asking to get back together. I either don't reply or give him a polite but very firm no. This doesn't really matter, but it's another funny little detail. He gave me my engagement ring to his mother as a Mother's Day gift, and now she wears it all the time. She has to know that it used to belong to me, but still finds it to be a sweet gift from her insane son. Reply 1. Sometimes men, especially men like that, perceive politeness as indecisiveness. If he ever asks again, do not be polite. Be firm, be clear, and be unambiguous. Tell him to never ask or contact you again, and that if he does, you'll pursue any legal action available to you. Move on with your life and keep him out of it forever. I hope you now realize you're way better than that guy, and I hope you found yourself a better group of friends. If your friends believe what he said about you without talking to you about it, they weren't real friends, and you're better off without them too. You're a smart woman to get out of that BS, and I'm sure you'll be able to recognize toxic behavior when you see it. Story 13. Not me, but a friend who was dating a girl he met at university. They had been dating for 3 or 4 years, and it seemed like a solid relationship. A lot in common: religion, family values, and education goals. A week before their wedding, she goes out on a date with another guy. How did my friend know? She came home late, was somewhat drunk, and tried to climb into bed. My friend interrupts her, asking what she's doing. She replies she's tired and wants to go to sleep. He kicks her out of the bed and tells her they're done. Long story short, it was messy, canceling wedding plans and awkward explanations to everyone. The poor guy had PTSD for a year from the situation. It's remarkable how he was able to face the reality of his situation head on and make the difficult decision to end the relationship, even with the wedding just around the corner. May your friend's journey serve as a lesson for others to always prioritize their own emotional well-being and self-respect. Story 14. Not me, but my cousin was supposed to marry a girl who fell head over heels in love with a guy she met 2 days before the wedding and left him not literally at the altar, but about as close as you can get. I was 5 or 6 and supposed to be a flower girl, and my 16-year-old brothers were the ushers. We lived about 6 hours away, and I remember being so confused the whole ride home as to why I hadn't been a flower girl while everyone else was silent. In a crazy small world twist, the guy she fell in love with is a professor at the same university as my brother and has an office down the hall. He and the bride have been married for, I guess, going on 20 years now. Meanwhile, my cousin has been married 3 times, busted for DUI so many times I don't think he can even get a license, and ballooned up to like 300 pounds. I think she made the right choice. Story 15. Runaway child bride? Anyway, when I was about 12 years old, smartphones became a thing. So I started talking to a man online who promised to take me away from my family. We talked every single day and late into the night. We loved each other about as much as a 12-year-old could live with a 40-year-old man. He told me he'd make me a mother of many kids and planned to get me pregnant ASAP. One day he drove down from Tennessee to pick me up. He was outside my house waiting for me. I put on my favorite white dress and went out to meet him. Then I froze. My mom had just had yet another baby. I started thinking about all that, if I missed out on it. Then growing up and finishing high school. I went back inside and never saw him again. Please leave your story down below in the comments. I would absolutely love to make a video about them in the future. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, peace.